President Trump continues to defend his oldest son for meeting with a Russian lawyer last year, saying most politicians would have attended. Trump Jr. says the meeting was primarily about the Magnitsky Act. The legislation imposes economic sanctions and travel restrictions on Russians named as human rights abusers. The act is named after Russian tax attorney Sergei Magnitsky. He died in 2009 in a Russian prison where he was held for his work exposing corruption among people linked to the Kremlin.
The Russian government says the cause of death was heart failure, but many observers believe Magnitsky was murdered. Among them is American businessman Bill Browder, who was once the biggest foreign investor in Russia. He has since become a vocal critic of the country and has clashed with President Vladimir Putin's government. Magnitsky was Browder's tax attorney, and Browder was a driving force behind the legislation. And Bill is joining us live in studio. Great to have you here, Bill. Let's talk about the Magnitsky Act, because in your opinion, you say it is Putin's #1 priority to lift these sanctions from the Magnitsky Act. It affects some 44 Russians right now. Why is this such a big deal for Vladimir Putin?
Well, Vladimir Putin is a kleptocrat. For 17 years, he's been taking lots of money from Russia. He's probably the richest man in the world now. And we've been able to trace from the crime that Sergei Magnitsky exposed a $230 million tax rebate fraud. And we've been able to trace some of that money from the fraud to a man named Sergei Roldugin, who was exposed in the Panama Papers as Putin's trustee or nominee. This is the famous $2 billion cellist. And so Putin has gotten some of the money. And because Putin has gotten some of the money, that means that all of Putin's money in the West is potentially exposed and could be frozen. And so this is just a very venal, personal thing for Vladimir Putin, that he doesn't want his money frozen.
Your book, Red Notice, which was written, I think, in 2015, right? I mean, I read it a couple years ago. It's fascinating to go back and read that, given what's happening now. The lawyer and the lobbyist who met with Don Trump Jr., as well as Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner. What do you think they were up to?
Well, the lawyer, her name is Natalia Veselnitskaya. She works for a Russian oligarch, a guy named Pyotr Kotsev. Pyotr Kotsev is a government official. He works for a Russian state railway company, which is one of the most important companies. And he was funding the anti-Magnitsky campaign in America. He was basically, I should also point out that his son's assets were frozen by the Department of Justice in America because they also received some of the money from the Magnitsky crime. And so Natalia Veselnitskaya was taking money from a Russian oligarch who's close to Vladimir Putin to try to overturn the Magnitsky Act. She then hires this guy, Rinat Akhmetshin, who is by all accounts, some kind of shady former Soviet spy, current spy operator in Washington. And he then organizes a full-on lobbying campaign, hiring the top lobbyists, the top law firms, the top PR firms to try to get rid of this Magnitsky.
But the Trump family says, but nothing came of this meeting. It was a nothing burger.
Well, so let's just look at it very simply. Vladimir Putin wants to get rid of this act that's going to sanction his assets. It's his top priority. He assigns an oligarch to go in and spend all the money to get rid of it. And the Russian KGB is not stupid. They want something in return, and we don't know what happened in that meeting. We don't know who said what to whom, because you can't trust the Russians, and the Trump people keep on changing their story. So who knows what kind of burger it is.
Here's what we do know. You called her, quote, probably the most aggressive person I have ever encountered in all of my conflicts, in all of my contacts with Russians.
That's correct.
The most aggressive person I've ever encountered.
Yeah. So I mean, this person she's remarkable. She had an unlimited budget, and I should caveat that she's not aggressive in a physical way.
Yeah.
Okay. This is all done legally, lobbying wise, investigation wise. They were surveilling me around the country. They were spending money on every different legal motion they could come up with. They were hiring lobbyists left, right, and center. They were getting to Donald Trump Jr. all on behalf of Vladimir Putin to get rid of the Magnitsky Act.
Do you believe there is a collusion to impact the American election, which is a different question?
I have no idea. All I can say is I know the Russian side intimately, and I can tell you that this was a highly resourced operation to get rid of a piece of legislation that would affect Vladimir Putin personally.
And I emailed you directly right after a word of the New York Times in the meeting when the mention of adoption and orphans came to mind, when Donald Trump Jr. said that's what she wanted to talk about. It goes far beyond just adoption, because explain to our viewers, that was Vladimir Putin's retaliation, right, to the Magnitsky Act, not allowing Americans to adopt Russian babies anymore, Russian children.
So Vladimir Putin was so angry about the Magnitsky Act that he was looking for some type of retaliation. He couldn't freeze assets or do other types of things because the Americans would retaliate against that. And so he came up with the most heartless, vindictive thing he could do, which was Americans were adopting disabled Russian orphans. And he said, no, you can't adopt them anymore. And there was like 500 families who had met babies and children who were like longing to go home to America to be, and I should say these were sick orphans, the ones with HIV and Down syndrome, because the Russians weren't letting the healthy ones go. And so effectively, Putin said no American adoptions. These kids weren't coming to America. Some of them end up dying in orphanages because they weren't being treated properly.
Have you been threatened, and do you fear for your life in any way?
I have been threatened on a number of occasions by agents of the Russian government and by Dmitry Medvedev himself, the former president and current prime minister of Russia, and I do fear for my life.
Thank you.
There's so much more to talk about, Bill. Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on.